The broadcast cut through every channel, overriding entertainment feeds, diplomatic briefings, and private transmissions alike. Across the galaxy, screens flickered, shifting to the cold, sterile interior of an Imperial warship. The room was vast and metallic, its sharp angles and unyielding symmetry designed for intimidation. Rows of soldiers stood at attention, their faceless helmets reflecting the pale blue glow of the overhead lights. At the center of the image, framed like a figure from some dark pantheon, stood Supreme Commander Vale Sorek of the Galactic Empire. His uniform was pristine, black trimmed with crimson, a perfect contrast to his ice-pale eyes. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he let the silence stretch, gripping the countless unseen viewers in a vice of anticipation. When he finally spoke, his voice was smooth, deliberate, each word precise, a scalpel slicing through the quiet. "This is justice." The camera panned, revealing a massive, industrial execution platform. At its center, arranged in cold, methodical rows, knelt 50,000 human women. They were of all ages, clothed in simple garments meant for prisoners. Some trembled, some wept, but many stared ahead with a defiant stillness. The enormity of their number was almost incomprehensible, a sea of lives reduced to political theater. Across the galaxy, people recoiled in horror. On the human colony of Eos Prime, where the first transmissions were received, entire city squares fell into silence as the broadcast hijacked public screens. Families in their homes clutched one another, hands gripping too tightly. In the halls of the United Terran Federation's command center, military officials stood frozen, eyes locked onto the unfolding nightmare. A lone figure pushed through the silent chamber, his breath short, his heart a drum in his chest. Ambassador Elias Carter. He was not a soldier, yet in this moment, he wished desperately for the power to strike back. He had spent the last decade fighting for diplomacy, for unity between the species of the galaxy. But as he stared at the sea of kneeling women, he felt something inside him begin to splinter. A woman in the front row lifted her chin. Her dark hair fell loosely around her face, and despite the shackles digging into her wrists, she carried herself like a queen. It took Elias a moment to recognize her, and when he did, the breath was stolen from his lungs. Senator Liana Voss, a diplomat, a negotiator. She had fought for peace with the Empire, had advocated for measured talks when others had called for war. Her lips moved, forming words the audio did not capture. Elias did not need to hear them to understand. "Forgive us." The Supreme Commander lifted his hand, and the execution began. The broadcast did not cut away. It did not flinch. The weapons fired in perfect synchronization, a sound like the crashing of a great iron door. 50,000 bodies collapsed as one. A moment ago, they had been women, individuals with names and histories. Now they were statistics. A warning. The screen returned to Vale Sorek. His expression was unchanged. "This is the fate of those who defy the Empire. You are dust beneath our boots. Do not forget it." Then the transmission ended, leaving a galaxy in stunned, smothering silence. In the command halls of the United Terran Federation, the silence did not last. The stunned horror gave way to something else, an intake of breath, a shifting of weight, an energy that crackled like the air before a storm. Elias turned sharply, moving toward the nearest exit, his mind already racing. He needed to speak before the Galactic Council, needed to make them see. He had spent years navigating the careful, tangled web of politics, of uneasy alliances and calculated neutrality. But this was no longer a matter of caution. This was slaughter. He did not look back at the screen. He did not need to. The image of the fallen would never leave him. As he strode through the hall, a voice called his name. He turned to see General Adrian Stokes, her uniform crisp, her expression unreadable. She was a woman who had commanded fleets, who had seen war in its rawest form, but even she seemed shaken. "What do you intend to do?" she asked. His voice was steady when he answered. "What humanity should have done long ago." She studied him for a moment before nodding. No more words were exchanged. None were needed. Outside, the stars burned, cold and distant. And far beyond them, the Empire watched, waiting for the galaxy to bow. Elias Carter intended to make them bleed instead. The diplomatic vessel Excalibur cut through the void like a blade of polished steel, its engines burning cold and efficient as it made its way toward the Galactic Council Central Station. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, a structure so vast it had its own gravitational field, its towering spires disappearing into the darkness beyond. It was here that the leaders of 1,000 civilizations gathered, a place where peace was negotiated and war was averted. Elias Carter stood at the viewport, his reflection a ghost against the backdrop of the stars. He had always believed in diplomacy, in the power of words to shape the future, but as he stared into the abyss of space, he felt something gnawing at him, something he dared not name. The doors behind him hissed open, and General Adrian Stokes entered. Her presence was sharp, commanding, her uniform pressed to perfection. She was not a woman prone to sentimentality, yet when she spoke, there was an edge of something dangerously close to concern. "They're calling it a tragedy," she said. "Not an act of war, not a genocide, a tragedy." Elias let out a slow breath, forcing down the tide of fury rising within him. "And what does the Council propose? A strongly worded condemnation? A trade sanction?" Adrian folded her arms. "Worse. They're debating whether humanity provoked this." He turned sharply, eyes burning. "Provoked? 50,000 innocent women executed in cold blood, and they're questioning us." "The Empire controls half the Council," she reminded him. "Their influence runs deeper than we ever imagined." Elias clenched his jaw, forcing himself to remain composed. The Council chamber was not a battlefield, but it would require the same level of strategy. He had one chance to make them listen, to force the galaxy to see the Empire for what it truly was. He could not afford to fail. The vessel docked smoothly, and the moment the airlock opened, a sea of alien delegates, advisors, and media personnel swarmed the docking bay. The Galactic Council had convened in emergency session, but Elias knew the truth. This was not about justice. It was about control. The Empire wanted to test humanity, to see how much blood it could spill before the galaxy looked away. Elias would not let them look away. As he entered the Grand Chamber, he felt the weight of 100 different species watching him. The room was vast, a circular amphitheater where planetary representatives sat in floating grav seats arranged in tiers. Some delegates were humanoid, others grotesque in their alien physiology, chitinous exoskeletons, shifting bioluminescent patterns, tendrils that rippled with every microexpression. It was a gathering of civilizations older and more powerful than humanity, yet at this moment, Elias felt no inferiority. At the central podium, High Chancellor Tavar, a towering reptilian with glimmering gold scales, raised a clawed hand. "Ambassador Elias Carter of the United Terran Federation, you have the floor." Elias stepped forward, his voice steady, amplified across the vast chamber. 2 days ago, the Galactic Empire broadcasted the execution of 50,000 unarmed civilians. 50,000 women. They were not soldiers. They were not rebels. They were diplomats, healers, mothers, daughters. The Supreme Commander of the Empire called it justice. I call it murder. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others remained impassive. Elias pressed on. "We gather in this chamber to uphold the tenets of peace. We have treaties. We have laws that govern how civilizations engage with one another. And yet, the Empire acts with impunity, slaughtering innocents on a scale that shatters even the most depraved of war crimes. Tell me, what does this council stand for if not to stop such horrors?" From across the chamber, a cold, measured voice answered. "Ambassador Carter, your outrage is understandable, but let us not distort the facts." The voice belonged to Grand Minister Kalos, the Empire's chief diplomat. He was a man of deliberate, practiced elegance, his silver hair swept back, his deep blue robes flowing like liquid midnight. He regarded Elias with something that might have been amusement. "The women executed were war criminals," Kalos continued smoothly. "They harbored terrorists. They funded rebellion. Their deaths were not an act of malice, but necessity. The Empire does not tolerate disorder. Elias held his ground, his fists tightening at his sides. A 5-year-old girl who clutched her mother's hand until the last second. Was she a war criminal, Minister Kalos? What about Senator Liana Voss, who sat at this very council advocating for peace with the Empire? Was she a terrorist? Kalos' expression remained infuriatingly calm. Collateral damage, regrettable but unavoidable. This council is no stranger to the harsh realities of governance. We do what must be done. A silence stretched between them, taut and suffocating. The chamber's atmosphere was thick with indecision, and Elias knew that words alone would not be enough. He needed to force their hand. "You speak of governance," he said, his voice lowering, turning sharper. "Then let us speak plainly. The Galactic Empire is not a government. It is a plague. It does not rule. It consumes. And if this council allows it to act without consequence, then it is complicit in every atrocity that follows." Some delegates stiffened. Others averted their gaze. Elias knew he had struck a nerve. He took a slow step forward, his voice rising. "Humanity will not forget this massacre, and we will not sit idle while the Empire slaughters our people like animals. If this council will not act, then we will." A tension filled the chamber, thick and electric. Kalos' lips curled in something resembling a smirk. "A bold claim, Ambassador Carter. But be careful. The path you threaten to walk is one of war. Are you certain your species is ready for that?" Elias met his gaze, unyielding. "The better question, Minister Kalos, is whether your empire is ready for us." A flicker of something passed through Kalos' eyes, annoyance, perhaps, or amusement laced with calculation. The Supreme Commander's envoy was not a man who acted without a plan, but Elias had made his stance clear. There would be no retreat, no submission. Chancellor Tavar cleared his throat, attempting to regain control of the chamber. "The council will deliberate on this matter. Until a decision is reached, all diplomatic actions will proceed as dictated by interstellar law." It was a dismissal, a way to stall, to bury the issue beneath bureaucracy and endless deliberation. Elias turned on his heel, making his way toward the exit. Adrian was waiting for him outside, her gaze hard. "They're going to do nothing," she said flatly. Elias nodded. "Then we'll do it ourselves." He stepped onto the diplomatic shuttle, his mind already racing ahead. The council had failed. The Empire had drawn first blood. Now, it was humanity's turn to strike back. The war began in silence, not with the declaration of battle trumpets, nor the eruption of fleets at the edges of enemy space, but in the whispered corridors of intelligence briefings and the quiet, methodical preparations of a species pushed beyond reason. Elias Carter stood aboard the command deck of the USS Indomitable, watching the vastness of space unfold before him. The bridge pulsed with a soft glow of holographic projections, officers moving with cold efficiency around their stations. The air hummed with restrained energy, the kind that precedes something irreversible. Adrian Stokes stood beside him, her arms crossed, her jaw set. "They still believe we won't do it," she said. Elias didn't look at her. He watched the distant stars, his thoughts a storm. "They believe we can't." The Galactic Council, even now, clung to the fantasy that humanity would accept its place, that outrage would dissolve into reluctant diplomacy. The Empire, in its arrogance, assumed that fear would leash humanity, as it had 1,000 other civilizations before them. They were wrong. A chime signaled an incoming transmission. The hollow interface flickered to life, revealing the sharp, lined face of Admiral Henshaw, commander of the 1st Terran Fleet. His presence carried the weight of years of war. A man who had fought before peace had made humanity complacent. "We have confirmation," Henshaw said. "The Empire's fortress world of Valzar is vulnerable. Their main fleet has moved to the outer sectors. We can strike before they expect it." Valzar, a symbol of imperial dominance, the heart of their military power in the region. A world thought untouchable. Adrian exhaled, a smirk twitching at the corner of her lips. "We won't get a second chance at this." Elias nodded. Then we take it. The orders were given. Engines roared to life. 100 warships emerged from the darkness, their hulls gleaming in the distant light of a dying star. They moved as one, a tide of vengeance set to crash against the Empire's walls. The battle began before the Empire realized it had already lost. The first salvo of torpedoes shattered Valzar's outer defenses, fire blooming in the void. Imperial ships scrambled unprepared, their formation sloppy, their movements reactive. The Terran fleet tore into them with brutal precision. Destroyers weaved through the chaos, railguns spitting tungsten death, while carriers unleashed swarms of strike craft that carved through enemy lines. Elias stood firm on the Indomitable's bridge, issuing commands with the steady poise of a man who had already seen the future. Each ship moved in coordination, each attack planned. The Empire had waged war for millennia, but they had never fought humans like this. A shockwave rippled through the ship as enemy fire glanced off their forward shields. The bridge crew adjusted, unfazed. Target their command center, Elias ordered. End this before they regroup. Adrian grinned. With pleasure. A single missile, sleek and precise, cut through the battlefield. It streaked toward the planet's surface, piercing the Imperial Command citadel in a flash of white-hot fury. The explosion consumed the central structure, sending debris cascading through the atmosphere. The heart of Valzar's leadership reduced to ash. Panic spread through the Imperial forces. Their fleet faltered, their formations crumbling. What had begun as an act of retaliation had become something greater, proof that the Empire could bleed. Elias turned to the communications officer. Open a channel. The hollow display flickered, revealing Minister Kalos. His usual composure was gone, replaced with something colder, harder. Elias held his gaze. 50,000 innocent women. That's what started this. Remember that. Kalos' expression barely shifted. But Elias saw it, the flicker of uncertainty. The realization that humanity was not another species to be cowed into submission. The transmission cut. The battle was over. But the war had only just begun.